So welcome everybody. It's great to have you here for our forum. I see people coming in. Would you please introduce yourself in the chat? Say where you're from, what organization you're with, how you heard about the forum. It'd be great to let you to find out how you heard about us and what part of the state you're from. Welcome to a livable Commonwealth, trees as a public good. We're going to wait a few moments to get started as we let people into the forum. Please take a moment and introduce yourself, where you're from.
Would you like us to introduce verbally or on the chat?
In the chat, please.
Okay.
I see we have people from Burlingame and Framingham. Great to see you. I myself am from Newton. There are people here from Jamaica Plain. We have people from all over the state, another Newtonian. Welcome. And from Irving in Western Mass. Great to see you. From Cambridge. Welcome. We're glad to know where you're from. If you're here as part of an organization, please let us know what group you're with. I see one from Roxbury working on Malcolm X Park. Others from Newton, the Greenfield Tree Committee, welcome. From Concord, from Bedford. People with Extinction Rebellion, one of our co-sponsors, with a variety of other groups from around the state. We're glad to see you. We'll ask that you keep yourself muted as you come in, and then we'll be a few minutes before we get started. I see Arlington, Sustainable Arlington, Extinction Rebellion, Families Creating Together, Jamaica Plain, Keep Hyde Park Beautiful. Great to have you. Lexington Tree Committee, so glad to have you.
A lot of people on.
Could people please mute just so that we can keep everything focused? Thank you. We have Billerica, Climate Action Now in Western Mass. Okay, well, we've got more people coming in. I'm going to at least begin to acknowledge our co-sponsors. The Trees as a Public Good Forum is co-hosted by Our Revolution Massachusetts Climate Action Group and also by Mass Call to Action. We've all worked very hard to bring this to you and we're looking forward to it. We have a wonderful set of co-sponsors. You can see listed there on the slide, people from both environmental advocacy groups and from democratic committees of towns, cities, and wards. We're thrilled to have everyone here. My name is Melissa Brown. I am with the ORMA Climate Action Group, and I will be moderating this evening. We have a wonderful lineup of speakers, and we're looking forward very much to being able to start what we hope will be an ongoing conversation with all of you. And we've still got,
oh my goodness, 143 people on.
Thank you. Whoever said 143 people, that's great to know. Could you please mute yourself? Just so that we can keep it focused on the speakers. No worries, we all do that sometimes. Thanks so much. So we have a great lineup for you here. And in just a few moments, I'm going to shift gears and do ORMA's land acknowledgement and invocation. So I will be shifting to that. And then after that, I will have the great pleasure of introducing our first speaker. So we're very much looking forward to having everybody here. Please tell us in the chat where you're from, what group you're with, and we look forward to working with you as we go forward. We want to recognize that we meet this evening on lands taken from Indigenous people, many of whom sit on land unceded to colonial powers, despite attempts at erasing their way of life. We affirm our solidarity with Indigenous peoples, including the Massachusetts, Mashpee, Pocumtuck, Wampanoag, and the Narragansett peoples. We recognize that we live within the American capitalist system founded on slavery, a system that established a legacy of violence and selfish acquisition that includes environmental destruction, racism, misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, and economic inequality. We endeavor to create a culture that recognizes that everyone should have a right to healthcare, affordable homes, clean air and water, and tree canopies. We recognize that we are all part of one earth and shared ecosystem. What happens in the Brazilian Amazon, in India, China, Africa, or other parts of the world we may never visit affects us all. Through forums like this one, we endeavor to educate the public on these complex issues. We want people to recognize their own power to stop damage to lands, water, air, and life, and the power to support healthy and sustainable renewal. So I am absolutely delighted that we are going to be able to talk about this urgent climate issue of trees tonight. There are many urgent climate issues. Trees often get disregarded, even though they provide absolutely crucial climate mitigation. And so tonight we are going to focus completely on trees. To begin our forum, we are so pleased to have Senator Cindy Cream. You may know her as the first Middlesex and Norfolk District Senator. She is also the Majority Leader of the Massachusetts Senate and the Chair of the Senate Committee on Global Warming and Climate Crisis. Senator Cream, if you would like to go ahead, please.
Thank you so much, Melissa. I'm overwhelmed with all the participants, nearly 200 participants. When I first started to chair this new committee for me, it's a committee. We don't have bills, we take up policy. We've had 5 hearings. We've heard so many climate issues, and the popularity of the issue has grown and grown and grown. And we are going to change the world because with so much interest and so many people involved. I have a granddaughter who, when I told her I was chairing this committee, she said, "It's too late, Grandma." But I have hope. I don't think it's too late. I think with all the interest and exuberance I see even tonight, it's not too late. But in any event, we certainly can look to mitigate the damage that has already taken place. And that brings us to the topic of trees. So I do want to thank our Revolution and Mass Call to Action for hosting the event, and to the many urban forestry advocates from around Massachusetts who are with us today. And I saw that, put them in the chat. I'm so impressed with all the different cities and towns and people that really do care about this. And I'm excited that we're coming together and building a coalition that recognize that trees are a vital public good. Thankfully, more and more people are beginning to recognize that trees aren't simply an aesthetic enhancement, that they are a critical piece of urban infrastructure. Last summer's record heat waves brought temperatures of over 100 degrees to Massachusetts. That kind of heat can be harmful to human health, even fatal, and isn't felt by everybody equally. Many communities in Massachusetts are urban heat islands, areas with low tree cover where heat is amplified to dangerous and even deadly levels. There are widespread news coverage this summer of the large disparity in heat that existed between leafy neighborhoods and neighborhoods where trees are scarce. On one summer day in Boston, the difference in temperature between West Roxbury and parts of Chinatown and Lower Roxbury was 10 degrees. A study conducted by the Nature Conservancy found a 7-degree temperature difference between tempers at certain neighborhoods in Worcester. As climate change brings heat waves that are more frequent and more intense, the heat disparity grows worse. That is why the state needs to step in and help municipalities build tree canopies, especially in any environmental justice community and other areas with low tree cover. But trees help us deal with far more than just heat. They also sequester carbon, filter the air, reduce energy bills, provide habitat for wildlife, remediate soil, absorb stormwater runoff, and promote better mental health. This season, I filed an ambitious bill known as the Municipal Reforestation Act, which recognized that trees are an essential infrastructure for climate resilience and environmental justice. The goal of the bill is to achieve 60% tree cover in every Massachusetts city and town. That's a lofty goal with a high price, but we have to have lofty goals. We have to have hope, and we have to set ourselves in a high standard. It would require every city and town to develop and implement a detailed municipal reforestation plan. Because many cities and towns don't have the funding or the capacity to plant and maintain hundreds of thousands of trees, it would provide funding to help cover a wide range of expenses, including labor, tree maintenance, administrative costs. It also would create an urban forest advisory council to provide technical assistance and share best practices and procedure. And this council would be under the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. This would be so important. It would elevate the issue for so many people. The bill prioritizes the neediest communities. Priority for funding would go to projects in areas with less than 20% tree cover or high levels of particulate pollution, or sites in environmental justice neighborhoods or heat islands. It's an excellent piece of legislation that creates a detailed, thoughtful, and collaborative framework for expanding urban tree canopy in Massachusetts. I hope I could partner with all of you to advance the Municipal Reforestation Act and other local and state efforts to protect and expand tree canopies in Massachusetts. It will make our Commonwealth a healthier, more equitable, and more resilient place. We already have set aside some ARPA funds for providing trees in gateway communities, for working with municipalities. I know one thing that people wanted to know is, what can you do? You support this bill? This bill is now in Senate Ways and Means. But once we support this bill, and it's Senate number 504, what can we do? Well, we can write to Ways and Means. We can get together and speak to the Mass Municipal Association. If the Mass Municipal Association were on board, this would help this bill tremendously. After all, it's municipalities that are going to work with this agency that we're going to set up. And this agency will make recommendations for what's best for each community. And again, each community has different needs. And so if we were to get the Mass Municipal Association on board, it would be huge. But for the present, I would hope and suggest that maybe all of you having communities could write to your senators, write to Ways and Means, try and elevate the interest in this bill. I'm proud to be here, and I hope that we can continue the dialogue with myself, with all of you on future things that we'll be doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator. And I just want to say to everyone, we have been putting in the chat a link to an action network that will take you to a place where you can send letters to your state rep and to your state senator to tell them that you support the bills that Senator Cream just told us about, and that to ask those your legislators to contact the Senate Ways and Means Committee and report favorably out of committee these two bills. So you can go ahead and take that action that Senator Cream talked about. At least the first step, we'll have to get it out of committee before we can work on the Mass Municipal Association, but we can do that together, yes. Thank you so much, Senator. So unless, Senator, you have further comments, we will go on to the next part of our program. Thank you again. We're delighted to have had Senator Cream talk to us. We are now going to be looking at I want to give you a brief overview of what we're going to talk about over the rest of the call this evening. Our program is set into two sections. The first is going to talk about urban tree canopies, which we're going to get introduced by a very special guest as well. And then we're going to talk about Massachusetts forest. And then we have some things at the end where we have next step to take, including joining a group that will help each other as people try to put forward legislation at the municipal level. Please do be aware that going forward, we will be putting links in the chat for items that you can do. If you click on them, they'll open in your window, and then you can come back and save those actions for later. We will also have a link to a Google Doc at the end that will have links available for you to act upon at that time. So I want to start our urban tree canopy section. We are very fortunate to have an introduction to that by Boston Mayor Michelle Wu. I do speak a little Chinese, so I thought I'd throw that in there. And now we're going to hear from Mayor Wu.
Hi everyone, it's Boston Mayor Michelle Wu. Thank you so much to Our Revolution Massachusetts and Massachusetts Call to Action for bringing us together to discuss some of Boston's most critical infrastructure, our tree canopy. Trees are infrastructure. They beautify our streets, provide shade, produce oxygen, give life and color and beauty to our outdoor spaces, all while functioning as efficient carbon sinks, capturing and removing harmful emissions from our atmosphere. They bring people together, encouraging Bostonians to spend more time outside and creating habitats for wildlife. And our trees are critical to combating urban heat island effect, which subjects parts of our city with the least green space to extreme heat that radiates off bare concrete and asphalt. In some cases, we've seen surface temperatures on streets and roofs reach 140 degrees in the summer, causing heat exhaustion and risks with other serious health issues. We know that our Black, brown, and low-income communities disproportionately bear the brunt of these impacts, which is why growing our tree canopy is a racial justice, economic justice, and public health issue. Here in Boston, we've taken steps to plant more trees, grow our urban forest equitably and sustainably, and ensure all our residents can access this public good. But there's still so much more we can do. Our tree canopy is a major part of our city-level Green New Deal to transform Boston into a national climate leader and ensure that the city we call home is safe and livable for generations to come. We'll continue using every resource city government has to grow our urban tree canopy, determining which areas to prioritize by looking at heat island maps to ensure that communities most at risk receive the coverage they need. This is an all-hands-on-deck effort to mobilize residents across all of our neighborhoods to grow our forest and tree canopy. And we'll work with our soon-to-be-hired Green New Deal advisor alongside the Energy, Environment, and Open Space Cabinet led by Chief Mariama White-Hammond to develop a truly comprehensive urban forest strategy to boost tree coverage everywhere. As we forge ahead toward a cleaner, greener, and more sustainable future, your partnership and advocacy and the work of organizations like yours are absolutely critical. Thank you for your passion, your leadership, and your partnership for climate justice.
So we have a lot to do. Thank you so much to Mayor Michelle Wu for giving us that pep talk to get going, because there are so many important things, and important to talk about all of the things and make sure that all of the pieces get done. So next, I want to let you know the next piece of our segment with, let's see, sorry, trying to go to the next slide. There we go. We're going to do our urban tree canopy segment, and there will be a piece talking about the kinds of eco-services that are provided by urban street trees. Then we'll have an action case talking about trees that were saved by the power of activism. And then we'll look at a case in Cambridge where they have passed new laws that strengthen protection for trees. And as Mayor Wu said, urban trees are under assault. There is a plethora of trees that have been cut down in Boston, in Chicopee, in Framingham, in Lexington, in Newton, in Northampton, in Salem, in Waltham. And these are just the ones I could fit on the slide. We were also told about trees in Arlington and trees in, we know that we lost 250 trees in Charlestown. Just incredible numbers of trees that we are losing as they are not protected. And we want to bring a focus to this so that people think about what is it that we are doing here and how can we have a better regard for trees. The Newton 2020 climate report said that Newton has lost half of its trees that were around in 1970 by 2015. So these are street trees. And if a place like Newton, which is fairly well-to-do, can't keep all of its street trees, how much more difficult is in places where there are struggles for funding for other things within the city government. We need to focus on this. We need to remind people that the assault, whether it comes from local government, from private businesses, from developers, that we need to push back and say that planting new trees doesn't offset the losses from mature trees. And to provide us with some data about that, we have a video from Mark Welsh, who is the Deputy Commissioner and City Forester in Newton Parks, Recreation, and Culture.
Hello, my name is Mark Welch, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. I've been an arborist and working in urban forestry for 25 years. I'm sure by now, most people are aware of the many benefits of trees. They produce oxygen, mitigate stormwater, they provide shade and cool, they clean our soil, they store carbon, they lower our heating costs, control noise, reduce pollution, and fight soil erosion. Especially important to a community are its street trees. In front of you, in the bright green dots, are the street trees in the community that I work in that are fabric or part of the community's urban forest. I plan on focusing on these trees as we go through this talk. Street trees have a profound impact on our environment. They provide all the benefits I've noted earlier, as well as they are a part of the fabric that knit a community together. They create a sense of place and connect people. There are many components to the care of a community's street trees. There's tree planting. There's the removal of dangerous trees that pose a risk to people. There's the care of the young trees that we plant. And there's community forestry and the pruning of mature trees. All have their place. Planting new trees is frequently seen as a top priority in a community tree program, with good reason. After all, if we are not planting new trees, we won't have new trees. Often overlooked is the importance of the care of new trees, and most importantly, the existing trees. New trees need to be diligently maintained while young. Young trees have a higher rate of failure compared to established trees, and their survival depends on watering, removing weeds, providing mulch, and proper pruning. Much like the young man in this picture, a small young tree needs to be taken care of so that as we grow and we mature, we contribute to our environment and our society. Existing trees, the established mature trees in a community, are the most important component of a community's public urban forest. And often these trees are overlooked. As street trees grow, their value to the environment grow exponentially. In the community I work in, we have taken a closer look at the value of our existing street trees. We have over 14,000 established, mature street trees and about 6,000 young trees. For our review, we focused on the 14,000 mature street trees. In this case, we are defining a mature street tree, as one that is planted 30 or more years ago. To quantify their environmental impacts, we focused on 3 of the most common measures of the importance of trees: stormwater interception, carbon removal from the environment, and energy conserved. So what were our findings in our community? As you can see on this slide, we looked at the annual benefits of mature trees versus young trees in the 3 main categories I mentioned before. For gallons of stormwater intercepted annually, our mature trees in our community intercepted 27 million gallons of stormwater each year. Our young trees, not even quite 1 million gallons. Our mature trees removed 9.5 million pounds of carbon each year, where the young trees only 320,000 pounds. And as far as kilowatt hours of energy conservation, our mature trees received nearly 18,000 kilowatts of energy, whereas our young trees didn't quite save 1 million. So why the difference? First, simply, we have more mature trees than young. Nearly 70% of our street trees are older than 30 years. Second, our average mature tree provides exponentially more benefit than our young trees. As a tree grows, its benefits increase dramatically. The difference between a mature tree and a young tree can be seen on this slide. One of our mature street trees in a year will reduce stormwater runoff by 1,900 gallons, whereas a young tree only 160 gallons a year. 2,600 pounds of carbon are removed from the atmosphere by our mature trees, but yet our young tree can only remove 60 pounds per year. 1,300 kilowatt hours of electricity or energy are conserved each year from each mature tree, whereas our young trees will only conserve 150 kilowatt hours each year. Even more dramatic is the difference between a new tree and our average mature tree. A mature tree, again, conserves 1,300 kilowatt hours a year, whereas a new tree only saves 100 kilowatt hours of energy a year. Stormwater, 1,900 gallons of water a year for our mature trees, and only 30 gallons of water for a new tree. Interestingly, that new tree will use more water than it will conserve in a year, because for the first several years of a new tree's life, we will water the tree weekly, applying 20 gallons of water to that tree each week. Ultimately, that new tree is a net loss for water for the year. And our carbon. At 2,600 pounds of carbon removed from the air, our mature trees vastly impact the environment more significantly in that year than our new tree with only 100 pounds of carbon removed per year with our new tree. What does this all show? For us, it shows that our existing mature trees are critical to the environment. Efforts should be made to prolong mature street trees by regularly caring for them. This should include pruning to ensure longevity, safety, and ensure that these trees are contributing assets to the community. Because one of these mature trees is equal to 30 new trees as far as their environmental impacts. One mature tree removes as much carbon as 90 new trees. And 1 year of our mature tree is equal to the first 20 plus years of our new trees that are planted. I appreciate your time, and thank you very much.
Wow, that was impressive and so informative. What's particularly important, I think, there's so many important things that Mark Welch gave us in that talk, but one of the ones that sticks with me is that so often when people cut down a tree, they say, oh, well, I'll plant a new one, one new one. Or sometimes if they're being generous, they'll say 2. But what he was saying was that we need to plant 30 new trees for every single mature tree we cut down to have the same, still maintain the climate mitigation that one mature tree kept. So this is definitely reasons for us to be acting now to save our mature trees. So for our next part in the program, we are going to turn now to excuse me. We're going to turn now to oh dear, Microsoft has decided it wants to go somewhere else with my computer. Excuse me. I apologize. There we go. We are going to turn now to Yvonne Lallier, who is with the Friends of Melniacast Boulevard. She's going to tell us about what is going on in Lower Roxbury, which is a Massachusetts state designated environmental justice neighborhood, where nevertheless, the city wanted to cut over 100 trees. Residents and activists fought back and won, and I'm so glad that she is here and able to tell us about her success. So Yvonne, please.
Thank you very much. I am delighted and very honored to be speaking this evening to you. And I really need to do something here because I lost my,
can I help with something, Yvonne?
I need to do this myself. I think I need to exit full screen. Yes. Yes, I think that due to a series of unforeseen events, I was catapulted to the front of a struggle that began in 2011 or 2010, when the Boston Transportation Department hosted a community meeting to present the project entitled Melniacast Boulevard Reconstruction Project. And what you see on the screen is the view of the boulevard, one side of the boulevard in the summer. It's just so pleasant to have two rows of trees when you're walking in Roxbury. I'm going to try to be brief, but I may need to be called on to stop at some point because I just made a chronological story of the events that brought us to where we are now. So this beautiful landscape was endangered in 2011 when the city began their attempt to spend $35 million, 10 of which were from the city and 25 from the state, from the feds, excuse me, to spend on a major reconstruction project in the city. In 2011, after this landmark demonstration, meeting from the city, a group of people, including the ACE, I'm trying to give credit to all these people because I wasn't really alone doing this. There was ACE, the Action for something. I'm not sure what the letters stand for, but it was ACE Walk Boston. There was Livable Street, represented by Ken Krukemeyer. There was the Orchard Park Neighborhood Association. I was representing my neighborhood. I was a member of the United Neighbors of Lower Roxbury. And there was Kay Matthews from Jamaica Plain, Allison Pultinas, who's a reporter from Mission Hill. And we started meeting with the city officials regarding the project. The second slide, please. Yeah, so this is what they proposed. And this is the view of their proposal, which was just to widen the boulevard to put just see the red line, a new bike path, and you put a new sidewalks, put a bus lane in the middle of the boulevard, and some other thing that I still don't know what it is, but it was it would require to enhance the boulevard 40 feet, which was the amount of feet that the state had secured for this project to start with, and they had never used it. So they wanted to use it now. So we were at the meeting and we said, this is what 40 feet looks like. And they said, oh, well, we'll think about it. So can I have the next slide, please? This is what the intersection of Shawmut Avenue and the Maniacas Boulevard would have looked like if they had done what they wanted. I mean, as you can see, I hope you can see that it was just, all the trees would have been cut down. There was no trees would have been left in this project. So the city agreed to meet with a small group of people, and we started talking about what could be a good design. This went on for years, during which the city kept saying that they kept making deals with people. For example, they proposed somebody from the Orchard Park development wanted to have a street made into a one-way street, and said, oh yeah, we'll do that. Why not? And then in 2015, we started walking. We made walks with politicians, including Byron Rushing. We had the Councilor Janie come and walk with us and to see what could be done with the boulevard. But eventually they made a presentation, and we didn't like it, but they said, oh, well, we'll work on it. And when we kept looking at the project, it seemed like there was still a lot of trees that were going to mature trees. And if you don't know the history, you know that there's a book called People Before Highways, and that will explain all the details about the attempt to build a highway through the neighborhood, which ended up in taking down many, many homes here and destroying a vibrant Black neighborhood, as happened similarly in many other parts of the country. But in the 70s, in the 80s, this was stopped, thanks to many, many, many activists. And the boulevard was the solution to plant 500 trees on both sides of the boulevard. And those are the trees that we have today. You know, they're 40 years old. So we were very upset about this thing, and we said, okay, well, let's work with them and see if we can make them, you know, do something, because people thought that something needed to be done. Nothing had been done in 40 years. You know, the trees had not been taken care of. The bike path was in disarray. The sidewalks was buckled. And so we said, okay, we'll work with the city and see if they can fix things without touching the trees. And they said, okay, we'll do that. Then they hired Stein and Hudson, major architectural firm, and they hired a young African-American architect to lead the project, to sway us into taking their suggestions. But we kept saying, no, we still need basic things like reducing the traffic speed. We need a new, safer crosswalks, and we want to keep the trees. And this went on and on and on. But anyway, in the one critical moment was when in 2016 the Boston Climate Ready report came out, and it shows that the boulevard was in the middle of an extreme heat island, and it was prone to overflow flooding for all the due to all the concrete that is around here. And so we were very hopeful that this was something that would make them react and save the trees, but no cigar. So so they changed the project a little bit, and that was the next slide. Let me see. Can you put the next slide on? No, this was, I just wanted to show you what it looked like. The way they present the design, you know, it looked beautiful. They put all these trees that look like grown-up trees, mature trees, but of course, we know that they're going to be just these tiny little trees. They also said that they were going to plant so many more trees, and you know, they could take so many, but they would double the number of trees they would plant. And we did not buy that. So after the climate ready report did not make any dent in their view of what should be done, we asked them to hire an arborist and tell us if it was really, because their argument was that, well, those are old trees and most of them are in bad condition. Yes and no. You know, many of them were not in good condition because they hadn't been taken care of. In 40 years, they had not been pruned. So they came around one winter between 2011, 2016, 2017, and they pruned the trees. And they pruned them so badly that we were thinking that they were going to die just because of that. So in early 2017, we got the arborist report. And the Boston Transportation Department officials said that all the trees were really not good. Most of them were in bad condition. And I made an analysis of the report from the arborist, and I considered that 91% of the trees were in very good or excellent condition, and 80% of the trees were in good condition. So it was obvious to me that they were lying to us. Oh dear. Let's see if I can go first. So in August of 2017, this is so aggravating. Madison Park Corporation took 23 trees from the boulevard with the excuse that this project was going to happen and they were going to just take over the area, and they took down the 23 trees. At that point, I met, at that hearing, there was a tree hearing, and I met David Meshuland from Speak for the Trees. This is very auspicious, I believe. By the end of 2017, though, the BTD had then changed the design and gotten the support of the Boston Cyclists Union, because they proposed 2 bike lanes, one on each side. And that was just, you know, a beautiful design for the cyclists. And then in July of 2018, the state said that the project did not need an environmental impact report. So we started demonstrating. And July of 2019 was the first demonstration at Washington and Venaka. And could you please put the next slide? Next slide. Yes. And then we started demonstrating. We started walking, and I made that huge sign, and I I stayed at the corner. That's the sign, and there, you know, and so people started joining us. I demonstrated like morning and evening for a whole month, every day at the corner of that. And you know, some people, you know, people joined, and they made those signs. And I wanted to show the next slide because it was just so overwhelming to see the people who came to the demonstrations. Like, this woman with her child, you know, he had read the Lorax, and here he was. He said, "I'm the Lorax." He was so excited to demonstrate for the trees, and there were other children. You know, people would bring their whole families to stand there. And then after the let's see. So in the summer of 2019, I thought that what we needed to do was to let people see the trees, because I thought people drive right here. They drive through here and they don't see the trees. I mean, and normally, actually, when we walk, we don't even look at the trees. We just assume, you know, that they are there. They're going to stay there. We only notice them when they are not there. And so I thought we need to make people be aware of the trees. And so I looked at all the trees that were going to be cut, and I put strips of mylar around the trees that were going to be cut. And then, but then I realized that it was not really visible. And then when I realized that there was no reaction still from, you know, from lots of people, when I realized that that was enough, I asked my neighbors to give me old bed sheets and made 3 inches wide strips to put around all the trees that were left. And that was all the trees on the boulevard, because in my justification was, I said, you know, these trees are going to be, they're going to die. It's not when they do the construction, it's when they're going to be damaged because of the construction. So at that point, the reporters like Chris Lovett started, you know, interviewed me, and then there was finally and then we started a petition on change.org, and we got well, first we had one petition that went to the State Department of Transportation, because they were going to approve the contract, and we were terrified that this was going to go on. So we started a change.org petition, and we got 500 signatures right before this happened. And they would not, they didn't even acknowledge the result of the petition. So we were terrified that this was going to happen, because they awarded the contract to a construction company from New Hampshire. And after that, we then started another petition to the council, to the city council, to have a hearing. And this one had 13,000 signatures, you know, because we already had all these people who had come to the demonstrations, and there's so many people who participated. And so then we had then the Globe had that article, and our petition to have a city council hearing was heeded. And at that meeting, we had interviews of people talking about the trees in English and in Spanish. And I never forget the sight of the Chief Osgood. His jaw dropped like this when he saw the people speaking. You know, they were interviewing, they were speaking about trees, and they said, we need the trees. We can't breathe without the trees. After that, the last thing that happened was that we got a letter from the council in mid-January of 2021, that said that they were going to stop the project. Now, moving forward, in my last slide, the group has continued to meet, and we meet weekly to try to figure out what to do with this $35 million or whatever, because the money is still there, so that we have something that the neighborhood would like. And we came up with this idea of a lower Roxbury Greenway, which is only a sketch of having, green spaces along the boulevard. And we're trying to save the green spaces and have more trees instead of just taking the trees. We also circulated a petition, a survey. We did a survey of the neighborhood. We asked people to say what they would like on the boulevard. And interesting enough, the highest, the choice that got the highest number of people was to reunite. They think that whatever we put there should attempt to reunite the neighborhood. So we're thinking of something that would not have cars, or something like what happened in Barcelona with the Sombras. Who knows, something beautiful that we can be proud of. So
that sounds absolutely fantastic, yeah. Yvonne.
And that's the last slide. This is what we want to save. This is our trees that we would like to save. We have a moratorium petition in the works, and I'm going to put in the chat an event that I hope that some of you can support. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Yvonne. And we have been putting in the chat the link to support the new proposed tree ordinance in Boston. Please do click on that link and support that. We also want to move on now, because one of the things that Yvonne's activism and the evidence that we saw earlier of all of these parts of Massachusetts where trees are being lost is that how do we resolve this? Obviously, activism is an incredibly important means for doing that, but we can also pass legislation that will protect trees. And one of the things that people often question about this is, well, how can we do that? How can we pass legislation, meaningful legislation, that will protect trees and protect trees on private land as well as on public land? Well, Cambridge City Council has done it. In 2021, they passed legislation that protects all trees in the city of Cambridge that are 6 inches in diameter or larger, whether on private or public property. And I had the opportunity to interview Councillor Quentin Zondervan of the Cambridge City Council, who was the person who was influential in getting that legislation through. And we're now going to hear from that interview with Councillor Zondervan about how they passed that legislation. So I want to take the time today to talk with City Councillor Quentin Zondervan of the Cambridge City Council. He is going to graciously tell us today about what Cambridge has been able to successfully do in protecting its trees and its tree canopy. So, Councillor Zondervan, could you please start by just giving us a brief outline of Cambridge Tree Protection Ordinance as it is now?
Certainly, I'm happy to do so. The main thing that we changed over the last few years was to add protection for trees that are slated to be cut down on smaller private properties. Previously, we had a tree protection ordinance that only applied to large developments, but it did not apply to smaller lots or homeowners cutting down trees on their property. So that was the main thing that we changed, was to add additional protections for those situations.
Thank you. And was that the most difficult part of the ordinance to pass? Or were there other challenges in the ordinance in getting it through and approved?
I think there were certainly other challenges, but I think the biggest stumbling block was for people to get comfortable with the idea that we would regulate what they can do on their private property with respect to trees. That was difficult for a lot of people to accept. And then for homeowners and small property owners, there was a concern about charging a fee to replace a tree that's cut down, because in order to for this to have any effect, you have to charge a significant amount. So we ended up charging about $1,000 per inch of diameter for cutting down a tree. But of course, that could quickly become a $10,000 burden or worse for a small property owner. And so what we did to mitigate that was to say that if someone is a resident property owner, they would only pay 10%. So if it would have been 10,000, now it's only 1,000. And then in addition to that, if they plant a replacement tree, there's a further 50% reduction. And so at the end of the day, if somebody cuts down a relatively small tree and replaces it, it's a reasonable fee. If they cut down a very large tree, then it could still be a significant fee. But again, that's the point, is to prevent them from doing so. And certainly if the tree is, dead or very dangerous, or, just has to be cut down, it's not just by choice, then they don't have to pay anything. So it's really just if a homeowner decides to cut down a tree, but they don't have to.
Thank you. And how did you and the city council address concerns about regulating trees and the tree canopy on private property? What were the things that you presented to the public to explain why this was important?
Right. I mean, it's essentially a public health issue, and those are always difficult to navigate because, of course, if one person every couple of decades decides to cut down a tree, no big deal, right? But if everybody's doing it every week, which is what was happening, then our tree canopy starts to decline very rapidly, and that becomes a public health issue. Particularly with climate change. We can't afford to have a declining tree canopy, and that's what we diagnosed back in 2017. So, that was really the main driver to say, look, we have to address this from a public health perspective, even though people might be uncomfortable with it from a private property rights perspective.
Thank you. And so when the council was in the process of discussing the ordinance changes, what did you do to make sure that people didn't race out and cut down trees?
Right. That's a really important point. So what happened was that we first passed a moratorium that basically said you can't cut down any trees because we've diagnosed an emergency that the trees are coming down rapidly. And that moratorium was in place for 2 years, and we further extended it because we ran into COVID. But during that time, we were discussing permanent changes to the ordinance. And so that gave us some protection because there wasn't really ever a gap where people could legally cut down the trees.
Thank you. That's very helpful. What part of the ordinance would you say has been most effective in protecting Cambridge's tree canopy?
Well, it's hard to say, but I think one of the biggest changes that we made with the moratorium, starting with the moratorium, was to require a permit for removing a tree. And so that gave us access to being able to regulate cutting down trees, because prior to that, anybody could just rent a chainsaw and cut down a tree. And that allowed us to, during the moratorium, collect data, because there were exceptions, again, if the tree is dead or dangerous, if it's partially fallen over, then the property owner is allowed to legally remove it. And so we were able to gather data about what was happening and where trees were being cut down. And of course, sometimes people would cut down a tree without a permit, and then, it would be, the city would find out about it. So I think that is an essential part of being able to regulate tree removal, is that we had to require a permit up front.
Thank you. Is there anything that the Cambridge City Council or you personally wanted to enact, but you were not able to because of state laws that precluded it?
Yeah, there are some complicating factors. I think probably one of the more complicated ones was the anti-8 amendment under the state constitution, which is interpreted by our legal department to mean that the city can't give people money or trees. And so it's a little bit tricky to think about, how can we help low-income property owners, for example, plant more trees, right? So, there are ways around it. We can go through nonprofits and other things like that. There is a state law that is interpreted through our back of the sidewalk program, where basically the city can plant a tree within 20 feet of the sidewalk, and it's then considered a public tree, even though it's planted on private property. And so the property owner agrees to take care of it. And so one conversation was, well, can we extend it beyond 20 feet, So there are some challenges with the state law there, but, at the end of the day, I think we can navigate that.
So going forward, what would you like to see added to the ordinance?
I think for now it's pretty good. It's only been in place for a year, and it's sort of in its final form. So it's a little too early in my mind to say, we need to go change it up again. But one of the things that has come up is this question around, sort of malicious tree pruning. So somebody could say, well, I'm not cutting down the tree, I'm just cutting off this limb today, and then tomorrow the other one. And eventually the tree is so degraded that it dies. And the current ordinance doesn't really protect against that. It does have a duty of care, so that if somebody's doing construction or other work on their property, they do need to ensure that the trees are protected from that activity. And there's a reach back clause, so the city can still go back up to 2 years later and say, we think this thing that you did caused the tree to die, and so therefore you have to mitigate that tree loss. But beyond the 2 years, again, we can't touch it. So it's a little bit of a loophole. I don't, again, it's too early to tell, how big a problem that is, but that is there.
Thank you. That's good to know. And finally, I wanted to ask if you have any advice for municipalities or counties that are looking to strengthen the legal protections of their tree canopy, about how they would begin or go forward with this process.
Yeah, I would say, start with the data. That's what we did in 2016, 2017. The official story was that our tree canopy was doing great, and it was expanding, and we were going to get to 30% tree canopy coverage. But intuitively, we could tell that the trees were dying. Both the street trees that we could see that were withering in the drought, and also, as city councilors, and community activists, we were getting constant phone calls, emails, text messages of people saying, hey, somebody's cutting down a tree, can you make it stop? And of course we couldn't. So we started working on asking the city to do another canopy study. And then we did a citizen science project where we did our own canopy assessment using Google Earth. And we concluded that the tree canopy, in fact, had begun to shrink. And when the city did a LiDAR study, they came to the same conclusion. And so that set the wheels into motion, where everybody started to coalesce around the idea that we needed to do something about it. But without that, grounding in the data, it's going to be pretty tough to convince people that, the government should have more reach into their private property. Once you have the data that says, look, there's a real problem here, and particularly, if we do the projection, right, if we keep going, we're going to be, losing our canopy to the point of no tree canopy coverage, and that's a serious public health risk. And there's a real equity concern there, because again, in Cambridge at least, over 60% of our residents are renters, right? So they don't have direct control over tree canopy, near where they live. And then, of course, in the densest areas in the city where most of our lowest income residents live, we have the least tree canopy. And so there's an equity issue there about making sure that we protect the tree canopy so that our most vulnerable residents have access to that amenity as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This is Cambridge City Councilor Quentin Zondervan. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Okay, wow. So that was just full of really important information. And it's something that I've gone back to since I've done the interview with him, thinking again about how to move forward. And at the end of this call, when we come back to next steps, we're going to talk about a group that we're trying to organize where people who are interested in getting this kind of legislation in their own municipality can get together and support each other and work out the steps for following and producing these kinds of legislation. But now it's time in our program to shift to talking about the forests. And I'm trying to get there we go. I want to talk about, shift to talking about what's happening with forests in Massachusetts. And we're going to have an action case again, looking at what's happening in the Pine Barrens. And then we will have another discussion about carbon storage by forests as a whole, which is substantially even more impressive and important for climate mitigation than individual street trees. And thinking about Massachusetts forests is incredibly important because there is a lot of commercial logging that's going on public lands, in addition to encroachment from development. These factors are damaging some water resources. They're damaging rare habitats and biodiversity. And one of the issues that we'll hear about as we come up in talking about the Pine Barrens is that they're often greenwashed, where there is a pretense that the overall outcome is green or has an environmental benefit because people use catchphrases like management, or they say it's for solar, in ways that are very problematic, as we will hear. So we're seeing cutting of Massachusetts forests all over the state, in western and central Massachusetts, and southeastern Massachusetts. And we're going to start now with a discussion from Linda Coombs, who is an author and historian of the Aquifer Wampanoag people, and also Meg Sheehan, a volunteer with Save the Pine Barrens. I am very pleased to be able to speak right now with Linda Coombs, author and historian of the Aquifer Wampanoag people, and Meg Sheehan,
who is a volunteer with Save the Pine Barrens. We're going to start by asking Linda if she would please let us know more about the history of the Wampanoag and their relationship with the land in the area where these destruction is going on.
Yes, good evening, and thank you for having me. The Wampanoag people are the indigenous people of the Plymouth, Boston, Cape Cod area. And according to our history, we've been here for at least 15,000 years since the glaciers have receded. And when, our creation history tells us that Creator made us from the white pine. So right from the beginning of our existence on Earth, we have a relationship with trees. We have a relationship with the earth where we do not look at ourselves as something separate from it. And this is substantiated in our language, in our native language, because there are words that describe our relationship with the land, and it's like, if our feet are not on the land, we have fallen off our feet, meaning we are separated from the land. And that was something that just wasn't conceivable because we saw ourselves in the land as one thing. And a lot of times when I speak about things like this, people think that I'm, that this native history, it's myths and legends, it's fanciful, it's quaint, whatever adjectives get thrown at it. And when the English and other explorers from Europe came here in the 16th and 17th century, they considered us to be primitive and backward people with no science, no religion, no brains, no anything. And yet they described the landscape that they saw with, trees and forests, it was fully forested. Trees were 100, even 200 feet high. 6 feet or more in diameter, and that wasn't single random trees, that was the forest. And, the numbers of birds and fish and animals, a single flock could number in the millions. There was so much abundance, so much life. It was so lush. And the Europeans never understood that we had something to do with that. It was the way that we lived with the land, the way that we related to it. The attitude that we had, that we do not destroy what the Creator made. Cutting down one tree for no good reason, to me, it's like spitting in the face of God. Okay? And the fact is that back at that time, 400 years ago, or up until 400 years, we were, I don't even like to use the word managing, but that's about it. We managed the landscape. When we were put on this earth, we were given original instructions, as was everything. The trees, the bears, the ants, the water, the wind, everything on this earth was given a set of original instructions. And that, bears were meant to be bears, and trees do what trees do, clean the air and all that sort of thing. The job of humans was to keep the earth as it was created. That's it. And we can take what we need for food and clothing and shelter and warmth and medicine, and all of that. But in doing so, we still have to keep things as they were created, because it doesn't belong to us. This is a gift to us. We're like guests here. And we maintained, that thinking, that value system. And that's what over those 15,000 years enabled us to keep the world as it was created, to keep it in balance. Everything that the Creator made, all the different systems, we kept that in balance. But we were backward and primitive, according to the Europeans. And even today, when I talk about things like this, people say, well, we can't go back. Well, we're not going forward today. With all the destruction of the landscape that's going on, it is not going forward. In 400 short years, which is nothing compared to 15,000 or more, the world is on the brink of destruction. And I think that those are things that people need to stop and think about and really seriously consider. I'm not here to tell you Indian lore and, legends and myths and fairy tales, but this is real. So thank you for your time. And I hope you can think about some of the things I've said.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think that is important for all of us to know and understand. Meg, could you tell us a little bit about give us an outline of what is happening in the coastal pine barrens, the destruction, who is doing it and why?
Sure, and thank you for having me. So yes, I'd be happy to. So in addition to the Indigenous history that Linda talked about, we have a unique ecosystem, and it contains and consists of glacial outwash plains that contain vast deposits of silica sand. And there's a global shortage right now of this silica sand that's used for fracking and other manufacturing uses. And for many years, southeastern Mass was characterized by cranberry bogs. Many hundreds and thousands of acres were drained, wetlands were drained, and cranberry bogs put in. Then the state pivoted to say, okay, we can't drain any more cranberry bogs. All bogs have to be built in upland. Well, as part of that whole lore, cranberry companies such as A.D. Makepeace, one of the largest cranberry growers in the world, located in Wareham, Mass, and southeastern Mass, started building cranberry bogs on the highest hills around. So that's the local joke, that they would pick the highest hill for locating the bogs, and therefore they would have to remove the silica sand, take down a hill that was, the highest around 150 feet, and then put in the bog. So that's what we have had going on for a very long time. And as the shortage of sand has gotten worse and worse, we've seen even more of this rush to extract the sand. And so it's not just sprawl or development that we're fighting. We're fighting the international market for sand, for silica sand. And when this is extracted, it obviously involves clear cutting trees, forests that have lain basically undisturbed for thousands of years, grubbing and pulling out the stumps, removing all the topsoil, extracting the sand, often mining down into the sole source aquifer. Another unique feature of southeastern Mass is the 199 square mile Plymouth Carver sole source aquifer. That is the sole source of drinking water for 7 towns, designated by the US EPA. And so these forests and the sand have been protecting the water quality in the aquifer for thousands of years. Now we're stripping that away. We're operating mechanized equipment in the groundwater, and all of this is largely unregulated. There are large landowners, such as A.D. Makepeace, as I mentioned, one of the largest landowners in the state, owns perhaps 10,000 acres of land. We have other big landowners with tracts of, 1,000, 2,000 acres. They are able to influence local boards and committees to give them these permits to do the extraction. It's not overseen by the state at all. It's local. It's considered local land use. So we're seeing vast amounts of corruption and self-dealing on these different boards that are giving out the permits. And then the cranberry industry, of course, in southeastern Mass, hides itself behind this cloak of Thanksgiving and this wonderful southeastern Mass quaint image. And Ocean Spray is a cooperative made up of growers. So it's a big web of self-interest that provides the cover for the cranberry companies and the landowners to do this extraction. And so then we have this extraction, denuding the land, and along comes the opportunity to put large-scale industrial solar on so-called farmland. And a lot of the cranberry bog owners are strip mining their land. Some of them are building fake bogs to put the dual-use solar on. So we really have this convergence of all these different factors and very little local regulation. So our local boards and committees throughout the region are becoming scrutinized by our campaign, and that's really where we're focusing right now, is on a grassroots campaign from town to town to get people involved and to stop the mining that's happening.
So going forward, how can allies best support your efforts?
Obviously, by signing up as a member on SaveThePineBarrens.org, following us on social media, Twitter, Facebook, and we'll also be putting out a letter campaign focused on Plymouth at this point, because that's where some of the biggest threats are happening right now. We have a campaign to stop a 136-acre strip mine in a biodiversity hotspot in Plymouth and the Frogfoot and Ronquinco River area. That's a target. And we also have a moratorium petition with our statewide network of allied forest groups and community activists to put a moratorium on state subsidies for ground-mounted solar that destroys forests and indigenous culture, and we want those solar panels put on rooftops or already built environments. So that's on our website as well. And keep in touch. We have some events coming up, and we'll put those out on social media.
Thank you. We will, and we will be happy to let people know about those as well. Thank you.
So that was very distressing to hear about what's happening in the Atlantic coastal pine barrens. This is on never ceded Wampanoag lands, and it's a particularly egregious case of a globally rare coastal habitat under siege. There are only 3 cases of coastal pine barrens in the world, and one of them is in southeastern Mass and under attack. It illustrates a wide range of devastating environmental impacts and also blatant disregard for the rights and historic stewardship of the Wampanoag Nation. We're going to turn to our last speaker this evening to tell us more about the services that forests provide to us. If I can get my slides to advance, there we are. Bob Leverett, we are so happy to have him with us. He is a senior advisor to American Forests. He's the author of the Sierra Club Guide to Ancient Forests of the Northeast, co-founder of the Native Tree Society, and that's only a few of his many titles and his expertise. And we are very lucky to have him with us here this evening.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now I should start the screen share, I guess, and go to here. Okay, and then I will go to play start. So, hello everyone. My name is Bob Leverett, and a few of my bona fides there, but I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to go straight to the subject at hand. I thought about how to try to present forests, trees versus forests.
You went too far. What is going to be touched upon?
I'm sorry, I went too far. And so I wanted to frame this along the research that I do so that I can talk, hopefully authoritatively, about carbon in trees and how well young trees do as opposed to mature trees. So first point is, do young trees sequester carbon at a faster rate than mature trees? Why am I putting that up there? Because a lot of sources that you would hear talk to that would say young trees, because that has been the prevailing view. And it's been the prevailing view for decades. However, the truth of the matter is it's the larger, older trees that actually win the race, as Mark was pointing out early on in his excellent presentation. But in order to know that, how reliable is the carbon sequestration information that people have access to, the general public, and is what I'm talking about, for example, through the internet, news media, etc. Not everyone is a scientist, so getting into very deep papers, that's not the way they get their news. And how do we actually measure carbon content in woody plants? I'd like to say a little bit about that, and basically then what conclusions can we draw? Now, what I'd like to do is say, first of all, I have plenty of respect for the Arbor Day Foundation, but I found this on a website that the value of a mature tree in the way they expressed it or explained it was that a mature tree can absorb 48 or more pounds of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and release oxygen in exchange. That may sound good, but here's a fact. We measure trees to a high level of accuracy, and one huge white pine we modeled in Mohawk Trail State Forest came to the conclusion that it is currently absorbing between 350 and 400 pounds of carbon dioxide in the year and storing them as elemental carbon or in compounds within the trunk and the limbs and twigs, etc. Foliage too, but that's not permanent. So it's a lot more. You go after the big trees and you look at them. Where did the 48 come from? Not sure, but probably related more to younger, much younger urban planted trees. Excuse me, I'm trying to, now here we go. There we go. Now,
no,
why do we know I'm having problems, folks?
Late research.
There we go.
No, okay.
There we go. Now I got it. Sorry, I apologize for that. Late research is showing that it's the big trees that are really doing the work. Here's a quote from Andrews Experimental Forest at Oregon State University. The rate of tree carbon accumulation increases continuously with tree size. Now, notice that, say, the rate of tree accumulation.
Mouse.
Okay, I'll point that out there. Now, let me go to another study, or actually this is a continuation of that, but points made. Large old trees do not act simply as senescent carbon reservoirs, but actively fix large amounts of carbon compared to smaller trees. At the extreme, a single big tree can add the same amount of carbon to a forest within a year as is contained in an entire mid-sized tree. Well, this applies more to sequoias and redwoods and trees of that size. But the point is made. Now,
no.
So, oops, again, I'm having, okay, so let's look at a forest scene and get maybe an intuitive feel. Here is two photographs. One is of white pines, that's on the left. The foliage you see in the foreground is hemlock, but the big trees are white pines. On the right, we see a early successional habitat with basically, and I'm sorry, folks, this is the amount of carbon obviously is overwhelmingly in the big trees. The young ones, as you see in this forested environment, it'll take them years and years to begin to catch up. So we can't say that a young forest is doing better than an existing mature forest. That is not the case. But one of the ways that I try to tell this story is through the growth of a single tree. This will help, I think, hopefully. We have in Western Massachusetts, Mohawk Trail State Forest, which is a location of some really colossal white pines. One of them we named after Chief Jake Swamp of the Mohawks, a personal friend of mine. He's passed on. And we measured, my slide presentation is doing its own thing. I apologize again. We've climbed this tree 4 different times. We originally measured it with a surveyor's transit. And now we measure it annually with lasers. We know this tree very well. Well, let's look at this tree in terms of what it does. If we think in terms of young trees, again, this tree in its first 50 years, we think achieved a circumference of about 7 feet. In the second 50 years, it added another 2 feet. And in the third 50-year increment, about 1.5 feet. So it looks here like all the action is in the first 50 years. That's circumference growth. It translates equally to diameter, of course. Let's go to height. In the first 50 years, we think the Jig Swamp tree made it to about 100 feet. In the second 50 years, it added 35 feet. And in the third 50-year period, it added 32 feet. We know this. We're estimating this, but we're pretty darn close. At any rate, it looks again like it's the young period of growth where all the action is taking place. But now let's translate from these individual measurements, circumference and height, to volume. Volume translates then directly to carbon. So in the first 50 years, this is what we would have as volume growth. In the second 50 years, here is our volume growth. And from 100 to 150 years, this is our volume growth. So most of the carbon is being sequestered later, not earlier. This, I think, it comes as a surprise to a lot of people who are in wood products interests, forestry, arboriculture even. The focus is oftentimes on the rapid early growth of circumference or diameter and of height, but in terms of volume, that's where the action is. So following volume is carbon. This is the real story. That translates, this is a big tree and it's a dominant tree. But let's go to the next slide, in which we just look in terms of a single mature tree, in terms of what would equal it if we had smaller trees. So I did this again, I have to apologize. One mature canopy tree, 100 feet tall and 54 inches in diameter. This happened to be an oak tree. It's an actual tree that I've measured. Suppose we compare that to younger trees, let's say 50 feet tall and 12 inches in diameter. It takes 35 of these younger trees, and 50 feet tall and 12 inches in diameter is not really that small, but you take 35 of them. Well, let's go down to 40 feet height and 6-inch diameter. Take 151 trees in order to match the one big canopy tree. And if we go down to a 25-foot tall tree with a 4-inch diameter, it takes us 465 trees to equal that one large tree. If we went all the way down to seedlings planted 1 inch in diameter and 4.5 feet tall, it would take the remarkable number of 61,364 planted trees to equal our one big tree. So I have about normally this, I've tried to take what I normally cover in an hour and squeeze it down to 10 or 11 minutes. But hopefully it gives us an idea. So I'm going to go to the final one and let's see, so what can we conclude? Well, larger, older trees hold more carbon than smaller, younger ones. That's obvious. You can look at that and see that a big tree is going to be obviously holding more carbon than a smaller one. But larger, older trees add more carbon on an annual basis than smaller, younger ones. That has not been obvious until recently. This is what we now understand. So if you take out a really big tree, or if you take out a lot of big trees, as in the case of a forest, as opposed to simply isolated trees in a park or along the street, then you can't make that up you can't plant your way out of what you just created. The individual dimensions and volumes of young trees increase faster on a percentage basis than they do for larger trees. But the large trees gain more carbon in absolute amount. The percentage level view has led to misunderstanding about the absolute growth rates of trees. And I'd like to end with one very beautiful scene, and this is a park. This is in Look Park in Northampton. And these are all mature white pines that you see. And I model them, come up with, measure them and the total volume and compute the annual rates of sequestration on a lot of them. So what's true of one tree is true for the whole group. At any rate, I find that a beautiful scene, and it's in a city park. Well, folks, that is as far as I can go now. I need to go back to where I was. Stop share. Where am I at? Stop share. Okay. So there I am. Sorry to have to go so fast, but hopefully the points are made.
Thank you very much, Bob. We really appreciate getting the benefit of your years of research and knowledge and your care with this. I know it was a much shorter presentation than you would normally give, but you really did pack it full of a lot of information that's very valuable to all of us. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
So we're just about done here. We have one or two more things I want to take care of. Most importantly, I want to tell you about next steps. It is direct actions that make officials, both elected and appointed, pay attention and act. So we need you. We need you to march. We need you to email. We need you to tweet. We need you to telephone, because without direct actions, we won't get anything done. There is a link in the chat and that we will pin to the comments when we post the recording for this video that gives the links for a number of different things, the actions that we have had in the chats. Also, very importantly, for a meeting that we are going to have on Thursday, May 5th at 7 p.m. to organize for people who want to pursue local initiatives in their communities to protect trees. So please sign up for that. Also, there are links in the chat to the various actions that we have mentioned tonight, all of them requested by our speakers, about passing the Boston Tree Protection Ordinance, passing the state 504 and House 905 for municipal reforestation, signing the petition against greenwashing solar that allows for clear cutting in the Pine Barrens, and emailing to pass House 912 and House 1002 to stop commercial logging in public forests in Massachusetts. Finally, for those of you who are able to tomorrow is Earth Day, and I want to encourage you to step out for in-person demonstrations in Boston at 1 p.m. on the Common. Massachusetts Peace Action is going to have a rally, and there's a link that will give you more information about that for peace and for the planet. And at 3:30 p.m., Extinction Rebellion Boston is going to take up the demonstration in Copley Square. For those of you in the western part of the state, in Northampton, tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. in Pulaski Park in Northampton, there will be another demonstration by Extinction Rebellion Western Mass. So please act on all of these things, come back to us for more. And finally, we want to end by doing something that ORMA does regularly. We're going to unmute everybody. And when I say when we organize, we want you to say we win. And we'll do it 3 times. So when we organize,
we win.
When we organize,
we win.
When we organize, Win! We can do this. We can do this. We can save trees.